Hi Ian, thanks for the footage. Quick overview of the issues that you're facing at the moment in regards to the shot pattern you described, and then a few relatively straightforward drills that are going to help you progress. First of all, I really like your setup. I think at times your knees can look a little bit kinked in when viewed from face on. You could certainly do with matching up the foot flare a little bit more, so turning the lead foot out a little bit more. And if I was going to tweak one thing at setup for you, I would just push the pelvis an inch or so towards the target. Once you've done that, I think setup wise, other than maybe looking at this, it looks about a 6 or a 7 iron. Camera angle looks pretty good. I would say that ball is a little bit too far back. This can lead to issues in regards to overtaking that we've talked about before, because as the ball goes further back, obviously you're de-lofting the golf club, steepening the angle of attack. If you have a certain trajectory in mind, when it gets down to maybe P6, 6.5, certainly to 7.5, the overtaking is a mechanism to increase the trajectory. So if you've got a ball position that is, let's say, going to produce this type of trajectory, all things being equal, but in your mind, you're visualizing this type of trajectory. One way of achieving that is to start getting the shaft to overtake and catch up with the hands a little bit too fast coming into impact. So that's something that you maybe want to pay a little bit of attention to at setup. Just turn the lead foot out a little bit more, push the pelvis just a little bit more forward, doesn't need to be pushed forward a lot, and just consider your ball location. Ball location reference point should be the lead shoulder. 0 point is in line with the lead shoulder, which is the center of the arc, and then a 6 or a 7 iron baseline position, generally speaking, would be 1, 2, maybe 3 balls back. So anywhere between 2 and 3 balls back of the center of the arc is an appropriate position for the ball when you're using a 6 or a 7 iron. That's your baseline that you should use. You can move it around in relation to that here and there, just to give you the desired shot shape or strike or angle of attack, if you will, depending on the shot, but use that as your baseline. Once you've done that, let's take a little look now at your swing. I'm just going to clear a few of those lines off for us. Okay, what I've marked off here is obviously face on, head with a circle around it to give us some idea of the rates at which we're side bending, turning and extending during the backswing. 2 dots on the shoulders to illustrate the differential between the two at P1. The right shoulder should be below the left shoulder should return to its P1 position by around about P6. So just remember that when we come to looking at your swing more towards impact. And then from down the line, I've illustrated the curvature of the spine, a line down the back side and a line on the head, just to give us an idea of how we're going on in regards to our inclination to the ground. So I'm just going to run this through to a few of the key areas. I'm going to match it up at P2. When at P2, I'd still like to see you extend the trail leg a little bit more than you do. I think that the pelvis turns too level at that point, and the shoulder tilts aren't really steep enough at that point down the line. The head's already started to drift away from the wall a little bit. So I'd like to see your knees changing flex P1 to P2 more incrementally. They tend not to do much P1 to P2 and then do quite a bit P2 to P4. Generally speaking, if you are going to maintain the knee flex a little bit more from P1 to P2, then what you would tend to look at doing, and this is an option if you want to do it, you would tend to load accumulator 4 a little bit less, that's the left arm, load accumulator 2 a little bit more, which is the wrist angles, and accumulator 1 wouldn't be travelling that far either. So 1 and 4 wouldn't move back as far, and the wrist would set sooner. If you want to see someone demonstrate that to the nth degree, watch any video with Mac O'Grady in it. So that loading sequence from P1 to P2 is a little bit more appropriate for that change in flex of the knees. So when you watch any Mac players, they tend to do a little bit less with the knees, P1 to P2, get accumulator 2, the wrists fully loaded by P2, and then the change in knee flex starts. Within our system, we prefer that the takeaway is more from the knees, right leg straightening, left leg flexing, hips rotating, arms and hands sort of loading a little bit more incrementally throughout the backswing. So just food for thought, play around with the two. Either keep the takeaway in the arms the same and start to straighten this right leg a little bit more, or load the wrists a little bit earlier, keep the arms a little bit more passive, and maybe use the, just get my right graphic on here, sorry, maybe use the hands in relation to the trail thigh face on at P2 as a barometer to whether you're doing it in an appropriate manner. Moving on, P2 to P3. Sorry, just get rid of a few more of these lines for us. We now see the knees changing flex. We start to see the head. Head rotates a lot when viewed from down the line. You see the head pulling away from the wall, the head raising within the circle. So that's a sign that we're extending without side bending. If you look where most of that occurs, most of it occurs from maybe 3.5 to 4. And if you watch your lead knee from face on, or any angle from that matter, the lead knee at this point stops flexing forward. The rotation of the hips will be pulling the knee sort of inwards, but it's not being offset by the flexing forward, and it's the change in flex of the lead knee predominantly at that point which helps keep the lead shoulder down and which helps keep the head in that box. Now, you can try to sort of actively create that during the swing. Based on my experiences, I think that's quite difficult to do for most players. It's a conditioning thing, and the best way to condition yourself in regards to the feels required, because you'll have your own unique feels, would be to make some swings with your head actually against the wall. You don't need a club in your hand. Just don't, grip an imaginary club, put your head against the wall, swing back as far as you can without your head moving. So keeping your head touching the same spot on the wall, and you'll start to get some feels in the knees and the shoulders, etc., etc. But we just need a little bit more tilt to offset the extension. Another way you could combat this is in regards to the backswing. That last little bit of the backswing there, do away with it. Not everybody needs to propel the left arm that far. If you have reached a point where you cannot side bend anymore, you do not want to then continue to extend. So again, a little bit like with the takeaway, I would imagine when you put your head on the wall, I don't really like telling players what things are going to feel like, but I would imagine when the head goes on the wall and it stays on the wall, you feel like you're about 3.5. 3.5, you've still got tons of extension to give, especially in the pelvis, but there isn't enough side bend. There's very little more flexion available in the lead ankle, in the lead knee, and the spine itself at that point. Truth be known, the spine does flex laterally during the backswing independently, but a lot of the lateral flexion that we see, i.e. the left tilt in the goal swing, comes from what the knee and the ankle on the lead side are doing. So you may find that when you get your head against the wall, you feel like you can't really go past 3.5. I personally think that position at the top that we're seeing here, albeit not the top for you, but I think that's a great position. What I like to see with my players is, I'm just going to get rid of a few more lines for us. As a general rule, when practicing with a mid-iron, always like to see the trail shoulder visible. That's a sign that accumulator 4, the left arm, accumulator 1, the right arm, haven't loaded too much. and also a sign that the arms haven't lifted off the rib cage. So when you're filming your swing, it'd be interesting actually if you can send some footage across of you doing the drill with the head against the wall. I'd be very surprised if your left arm travels much further than that during that drill. And you'll see during that drill how the knees change flex more incrementally as well. Very little extra is gained from taking that club any further back than we have it here, other than, in your case, making the swing more difficult to maintain or manage into impact. Which then brings us on to the impact area. Right arm and wrist angles still coming out a little bit too fast. Because the arms are coming out fast, the chest must pull away. You can see the difference in the sort of the butt line, the headline, and the spine curvature at P7. And if we talked before about where the lead shoulder should be at P6, lead shoulder should be back where it was at P1 by P6. And you can see that your lead shoulder, because of what you're seeing down the line, is higher and therefore further around, if you will, than it was at P1. So the lead shoulder, which is the center of the arc, is raising too fast. When that's done excessively, without the right arm and wrist coming out enough, that's when you're going to top the golf ball. You mentioned about hitting sort of a stone cold top on occasion. So the feeling that I want you to have in your downswing. So we talked a lot there about your backswing. What I'd like you to do during the downswing, and I'm going to focus primarily on down the line here, I want you to maintain the angles in the wrist, maintain the angles in the right arm, and keep the chest facing the camera all the way to P6. From face on, I want you to, when you're filming this, and this might be another visual for you, I want the lead shoulder to stay down as you maintain the angles in the wrist, in the right forearm, all the way to P6. So you can see there that your lead shoulder starts to climb pretty quick. I want your lead shoulder working down whilst you maintain the angles in the wrist.